I'm Michael Thompson, 34, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I was doing everything right as a single dad to my twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, working double shifts at the auto repair shop, missing sleep to help with homework, saving every penny for their future. I believed love would be enough. Then my 7-year-old Emma came home from her mother's house and asked me why I don't really love them anymore. "Daddy, why did you stop caring about us?" The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. When I pressed for details, both girls revealed that their stepfather, Derek, had been telling them for months that their real dad doesn't love them, that I only pretend to care, and that he's their new daddy now. My ex-wife Lisa had remarried, a successful lawyer who showered my children with expensive gifts while systematically poisoning their minds against me. But Derek made one crucial mistake. He underestimated how far a father will go to protect his children. What happened next would expose the truth about their perfect new family and change everything forever. That night, after tucking the girls into their twin beds in my small apartment, I sat them down with hot chocolate, the generic brand I could afford, not the fancy stuff they were used to at Mom's house. My hand shook as I poured the steaming liquid, trying to find the right words to uncover what had been poisoning my daughters' minds. "Emma, Sophie, can you tell Daddy more about what Derek said?" I kept my voice gentle, though my heart was pounding against my ribs. Sophie, always the more talkative twin, looked at Emma before speaking. "He said, you only take us on weekends because the judge makes you. That you'd rather be working on cars than spending time with us." The words hit like physical blows. I'd been working those extra shifts precisely so I could provide for them, so they'd have everything they needed when they were with me. Emma pulled out a small notebook from her back, kind with a glittery unicorn on the cover that I'd bought her for her birthday last month. "We wrote down the things that confused us," she said quietly. "Derek said we should remember everything so we could tell the judge someday." My blood ran cold. I opened the notebook with trembling fingers, reading their 7-year-old handwriting, documenting weeks of psychological manipulation. "Daddy doesn't pay for our school. Daddy can't afford to take us nice places. Derek says Daddy is selfish. Girls, do you remember when we built that blanket fort last month, and when we made pancakes that looked like Mickey Mouse? Did those times feel like I didn't love you?" Both girls' faces crumpled, and suddenly they were crying deep, confused. SOBs that told me everything I needed to know. They'd been torn between what they felt and what they'd been told to believe. As I held them, my mind raced back to the divorce proceedings 2 years ago. Lisa had been reasonable then, even sympathetic about my financial struggles. We'd agreed on a custody arrangement that put the girls first, but Derek had changed everything. He'd turned what should have been a cooperative co-parenting relationship into a war zone. Derek said, "If we love him more, we'll have a better life." Sophie whispered against my shoulder. "He makes Mom happy," Emma added. "He said you make her sad." The systematic nature of it became clear. Derek hadn't just been bad-mouthing me, he'd been creating a narrative where loving me meant betraying their mother and their new family. He'd weaponized their loyalty and their desire to please. After the girls fell asleep, I stood in my bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, stubble I hadn't had time to shave, work clothes that smelled like motor oil. Next to Derek's expensive suits and perfect smile, I looked exactly like what he'd been telling my daughters. I was a failure. But looking at that notebook, seeing their confusion written in crayon and pencil, something hardened inside me. This wasn't about money or houses or cars. This was about 2 little girls who deserved to love both their parents without being forced to choose sides. Derek had made a crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what a father's love could do when his children were threatened. He'd assumed I'd give up, step aside, let him have the family he wanted. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The next morning, after dropping the girls at school, I found myself staring at the dusty football trophy on my dresser. MVP, state championship, 2008. 15 years ago, I'd been the guy everyone thought would make it. Full ride to state university, NFL scouts watching my games, a future that seemed limitless. Then came the hit that changed everything. Third game of my sophomore season, my knee twisted in a way knees aren't supposed to twist. 3 surgeries. Later, the doctors were clear. My football career was over. The scholarship disappeared, and suddenly I was just another college dropout trying to figure out how to pay rent. That's when I met Lisa in the student union. Both of us nursing our disappointments, mine over football, hers over failing organic chemistry and losing her pre-med dreams. We bonded over being former golden children who'd fallen from grace. She was beautiful, funny, and understood what it felt like to have your life's plan disappear overnight. We dated through the rest of college, both working part-time jobs to make ends meet. I'd found my way to automotive repair through a community college program. Working with my hands came naturally, and cars made sense in a way that nothing else had since football. Lisa finished her degree in communications, but never found her passion. The proposal happened in our tiny apartment, with a ring I'd saved 6 months to afford. She said yes, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She'd grown up comfortable, and the reality of marrying a mechanic was starting to sink in. Still, we were in love, and love was supposed to be enough. Emma and Sophie arrived 2 years later, Premature twins who spent their first month in the NICU watching those tiny fighters. In their incubators, I understood for the first time what real strength looked like. They became my purpose, my drive to be better than I'd thought possible. But parenthood is expensive, especially with 2 babies and Lisa staying home. I took on extra shifts, weekend work, anything to keep us afloat. Lisa grew increasingly frustrated with our financial struggles, with clipping coupons in generic brands and never having enough left over for the things she wanted. "This isn't the life I imagined," she'd say during our late-night arguments. "My friends are buying houses, taking vacations. We can barely afford daycare." I'd promised things would get better, that I'd find a way to make more money. But the truth was, I was already working 70-hour weeks. There weren't enough hours in the day to earn what she wanted us to have. The girls were 4 when Lisa announced she'd enrolled in paralegal classes. "I need to contribute more," she said. But what she meant was she needed to have options. By the time she graduated and started working at Martinez & Associates, our marriage was running on fumes. Derek Martinez, senior partner, was everything I wasn't. Successful, polished, divorced himself with no kids to complicate his life. He could offer Lisa the comfort and status she'd always wanted. When she asked for the divorce, I wasn't surprised. When she asked for primary custody, I was devastated. "The girls need stability," she'd said through her lawyer. "Michael's work schedule isn't conducive to primary parenting." I'd fought for 50-50 custody but settled for every other weekend and 1 night a week. My lawyer, a public defender who took family cases on the side, had been clear about my chances against Derek's firm. "Take what you can get and be grateful," he'd advised. Looking back now, I realized Derek had been positioning himself as the girl's father figure from the beginning. Lisa's stories about work always featured Derek says this, or Derek thinks that. He'd been auditioning for the role of family man, and I'd been too naive to see it coming. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same knee injury that ended my football dreams had led me to a career that Lisa saw as beneath her, which led her to Derek, who was now trying to erase me from my daughter's lives entirely. But that trophy represented more than lost potential. Represented what I'd learned about fighting through adversity, about not giving up when everyone counts you out. Derek might have the money and the legal connections, but he'd made one critical error in judgment. He'd forgotten that some fights aren't about who has the better resources. Sometimes they're about who has the most to lose. Derek Martinez's business cards were everywhere in his house, catered on counters, tucked into books, displayed in elegant holders. Martinez & Associates, family law specialists, printed on thick cardstock with gold embossing. Even his business cards screamed success and authority. I'd only been inside Lisa's new home twice, both times to pick up the girls when they were sick. The house sat in Willowbrook Estates, where the monthly HOA fees were more than my rent. Tudor-style architecture, 3-car garage, manicured lawn maintained by a professional service. It was the kind of place Lisa had shown me pictures of during our marriage, sighing wistfully and saying someday. Derek had made someday happen within 6 months of their wedding. The interior was a magazine spread come to life. Hardwood floors that gleamed, custom furniture arranged with designer precision, artwork that probably cost more than my car. The girls' rooms were pink palaces with canopy beds, walk-in closets, and enough toys to stock a small store. "Daddy, look what Derek bought us," Emma had squealed during one pickup, showing off a dollhouse that was a perfect replica of their new home, complete with tiny furniture and LED lighting. It probably cost more than I made in a month. Derek himself was everything you'd expect from a successful attorney. 6'2", silver hair that looked professionally styled even on Saturday mornings. Teeth that belonged in a dental advertisement. He wore casual clothes that somehow looked more expensive than my best suit. Even his weekend wear screamed, "I belong in this house." What struck me most was how he'd inserted himself into every aspect of the girls' lives. Their school emergency contacts listed him first, before me. He attended their parent-teacher conferences. He coached their soccer team. He'd systematically taken over all the roles I'd once filled, and he'd done it with Lisa's full support. "Derek knows so much about child development," Lisa had mentioned during one of our brief conversations. "He's been reading all these books about parenting and psychology. He thinks the girls would benefit from more structure." The structure, I learned, included rigid schedules, educational activities instead of playtime, and constant reminders about appropriate behavior. The girls had gone from carefree 7-year-olds to miniature adults who apologized for everything and asked permission before laughing too loudly. But Derek's true genius was in how he'd won Lisa over completely. She'd gone from defensive about our relationship to actively hostile, parroting his talking points about what's best for the children. Her voice had taken on his measured, authoritative tone. Her clothes had become more conservative, more expensive. She'd even started using his legal phrases in everyday conversation. "Michael, we need to discuss the parameters of your visitation schedule," she'd said during our last phone call, sounding like she was reading from a brief. Derek feels that consistency is paramount for the girl's emotional development. The parameters, it turned out, included restrictions I'd never agreed to. No overnight visits if I had to work the next day. No taking them to inappropriate venues like arcade restaurants or amusement parks. No buying them gifts without prior approval, because excessive materialism isn't healthy. The most insidious part was how reasonable it all sounded. Derek presented every limitation as being in the girl's best interest, backed by child psychology, articles, and parenting books. How could I argue against what was supposedly best for my children? The answer came during Emma's last pickup, when I overheard Derek talking to someone on his phone while the girls gathered their things. The biological father is becoming less relevant by the week, he'd said, not bothering to lower his voice. Lisa's fully on board with the transition plan. Give it another 6 months, and he'll either walk away on his own, or we'll have grounds to petition for full custody based on alienation of affection. Alienation of affection caused by him, blamed on me. It was brilliant in its cruelty. As I drove the girls back to my modest apartment, I watched them in the rearview mirror, sitting quietly with their hands folded, looking nothing like the giggling, energetic children they'd been just months ago. Derek had given them everything money could buy, but in the process, he'd stolen something precious: their childhood, their spontaneity, their unguarded love for their father. The business cards scattered throughout that perfect house weren't just contact information. They were territorial markers, claiming ownership of a life that had once included me. Derek had built a beautiful prison for my family, and the most heartbreaking part was that Lisa couldn't see the bars. The Father's Day card sat propped against my coffee pot like an accusation. Emma had drawn 2 stick figures, one tall in a suit labeled Derek, one shorter in work clothes labeled Dad. Above Derek, she'd written "Best Stepdad Ever" in careful block letters. Above me, in smaller handwriting, "Just thank you for trying. Thank you for trying." 7 years old, and my daughter was already managing my feelings, protecting me from the full weight of her conflicted loyalties. Our weekends had become exercises in careful navigation. The girls would arrive Friday evening with overnight bags, packed by Lisa, containing instructions for bedtimes, meal preferences, and activities Derek deemed enriching. Gone were the spontaneous adventures we used to take: trips to the lake, impromptu ice cream runs, building forts out of couch cushions. Derek says sugar before bedtime disrupts sleep patterns. Sophie had informed me when I offered to make our traditional Saturday morning pancakes, and he says fort building teaches children that machines this is acceptable. Instead, they expected structured activities with educational value. When I suggested we go to the arcade, Emma had looked genuinely worried. Is that allowed? Derek says those places are overstimulating and promote unhealthy competition. I'd canceled the arcade plan and taken them to the library instead, watching them check out books from Derek's approved reading list, while I remembered the days when they'd beg for silly picture books about talking animals and magic trees. The financial disparity had become impossible to ignore. Derek took them skiing in Aspen. I took them hiking in the local state park. Derek enrolled them in private tennis lessons. I taught them to throw a football in the parking lot behind my apartment. Derek bought them tablets and educational software. I showed them how to make paper airplanes and raced them down the hallway. But something shifted during one of those paper airplane races. Emma's plane folded with the imprecise enthusiasm of a 7-year-old, crashed immediately. Instead of the careful composure she'd been maintaining, she burst into giggles. Real giggles, unguarded and joyful. "It's okay to laugh," I'd told her, and she'd looked at me like I'd given her permission to breathe. "Derek says laughing too loudly is disruptive to others," she'd whispered, then glanced around my empty apartment and giggled again, louder this time. These moments became my lifeline, teeny cracks in the perfect facade Derek had built around my daughters. During our budget grocery trips, Sophie would sneak generic cereal into the cart and whisper, "This tastes just as good as the expensive kind." When we played board games, Emma would choose Candyland over the strategy games Derek preferred, admitting she just wanted to have fun instead of thinking so hard. But Monday morning always came, and with it, the return to Derek's world. I'd watch them transform in the car on the way back to Lisa's house, shoulders straightening, voices becoming more formal, spontaneity draining away like water from a broken glass. "Remember, girls," I'd always tell them before they got out of the car, "Daddy loves you no matter what anyone says, and it's okay to love everyone in your family. Love isn't something that runs out." The last weekend before everything changed, Emma had presented me with that Father's Day card. As I'd tucked them into bed, she'd wrapped her small arms around my neck and whispered, "Daddy, I don't understand why loving you has to make Derek sad." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Derek says, if we love you too much, it means we don't appreciate everything he and mommy do for us, but I have room in my heart for everybody. Why doesn't he?" Lying in my own bed that night, I'd stared at the ceiling and realized Derek's strategy was working. He wasn't just trying to replace me. He was forcing my daughters to choose between their old life and their new one, between their father and their security. He'd turned love into a zero-sum game where caring about me meant betraying their mother and him. The cruelest part was how reasonable it all sounded from the outside. Derek provided stability, resources, educational opportunities. One provided weekend adventures and unconditional love. In any custody evaluation, his contributions would be measurable, quantifiable, impressive. Mine would seem insignificant by comparison, but as I'd watched Emma's face light up during that paper airplane race, I'd understood something Derek's psychology books hadn't taught him. Children don't need perfection. They need permission to be themselves, to love freely, to laugh without measuring the volume. First, that Father's Day card with its careful praise for Derek and its gentle consolation for me wasn't just a child's artwork. It was evidence of psychological manipulation so subtle and systematic that my 7-year-old daughter had internalized the message that her father was a disappointment she needed to manage. Derek had won the battle for resources and status, but he'd forgotten that the war was for my daughter's hearts, and hearts can't be bought with tennis lessons and Tudor houses. Sometimes, they're won with paper airplanes and permission to laugh too loudly. The original custody agreement sat on my kitchen table like a historical artifact from a more innocent time. Signed 2 years ago, it had been based on cooperation and mutual respect. Both parties agreed to encourage the children's relationship with the other parent. Neither party shall make disparaging remarks about the other parent in the presence of the children. All major decisions regarding the children's welfare shall be made jointly. Derek had systematically violated every provision while maintaining plausible deniability. My Google search history told the story of my growing desperation: parental alienation syndrome, custody modification laws, emotional abuse of children, how to prove psychological manipulation. The more I read, the more I understood the magnitude of what I was facing. Parental alienation, I learned, was real but difficult to prove. It required demonstrating a pattern of behavior designed to damage the child's relationship with the other parent. But Derek was too smart to leave obvious evidence. His manipulation was subtle, consistent, and presented as being in the children's best interest. The consultation with Margaret Chen, a family law attorney whose office was above a Vietnamese restaurant, cost me $300. I couldn't afford her small waiting room smelled like pho and disappointment, mostly disappointed fathers, I suspected, who'd found themselves in similar situations. Mr. Thompson, Margaret had said, reviewing my case file, parental alienation cases are among the most difficult to win. The burden of proof is enormous, and frankly, you're at a significant disadvantage. She'd explained why with brutal honesty. Derek's reputation in the legal community was sterling. He'd handled high-profile custody cases, served on the state bar's family law committee, and had relationships with most of the judges in our county. His firm donated generously to judicial campaigns and local charities. You're essentially asking the court to believe that a respected family law attorney is systematically violating the principles he's sworn to uphold, Margaret had continued. Without concrete evidence, recordings, witnesses, documentation becomes he said, she said. And in those situations, credibility matters. The cost of fighting Derek properly would be astronomical. Expert witnesses to testify about parental alienation, child psychologists to evaluate the girls, private investigators to document the manipulation. Margaret estimated it could cost upward of $50,000, with no guarantee of success. Even if you win, she'd warned, Derek's firm could appeal, drag this out for years. Can you afford that kind of battle, both financially and emotionally? I'd walked out of her office feeling like I'd been sentenced to watch my daughters disappear. In slow motion, the system was designed to favor stability and resources, not emotional bonds. Derek had turned the law itself into a weapon against me. But Margaret had given me one piece of hope. If you can document the alienation recordings of conversations, witness testimony, evidence of systematic manipulation, you might have a case. The key is proving intent. Show that Derek is deliberately trying to damage your relationship with your daughters, not just providing them with a better life. The problem was getting that evidence. Derek was too smart to alienate the girls in front of witnesses. His manipulation happened in private moments. During car rides and bedtime conversations, in the subtle ways he framed every interaction to cast doubt on my love and commitment. I'd started keeping a journal, documenting every change in my daughter's behavior, every repeated phrase that sounded like Derek's influence, every violation of our custody agreement, but written observations from a bitter ex-husband wouldn't carry much weight in court. Against the respected attorney's reputation, the research into Derek's background had been enlightening and disturbing. He'd built his career on high custody cases, often representing clients who wanted to limit their ex-spouse's access to their children. His success rate was impressive. His methods apparently effective, but reading between the lines of court records and Bar Association newsletters, I'd found hints of controversy. A few cases where opposing counsel had alleged misconduct, a disciplinary inquiry that had been quietly resolved. Nothing definitive, but enough to suggest that Derek's stellar reputation might have some tarnished edges. The most chilling discovery was a quote from Derek in a legal journal article about custody disputes. The most effective strategy is to demonstrate that the children's emotional well-being improves when their time with the problematic parent is limited. Document every behavioral issue, every academic struggle, Every sign that the current arrangement isn't serving the children's best interests. He'd literally written the playbook he was using against me. That night, I'd called my brother Jake, who lived 3 states away, but had always been my voice of reason. "Mike," he'd said after I'd explained the situation, "this sounds like a fight. You can't win. Maybe it's time to think about what's really best for Emma and Sophie. If they're happy and stable, maybe backing off is the right thing to do." But backing off was exactly what Derek wanted. It was the endgame he'd been working toward, my voluntary surrender of my daughter's affection and loyalty. He'd made fighting so expensive, so emotionally draining, that giving up would seem like the reasonable choice. Staring at that custody agreement, I'd realized something important. Derek hadn't just broken the law, he'd perverted it. He'd used his expertise in family law to systematically destroy a family while maintaining the appearance of protecting it. The legal system might be rigged in his favor, but it wasn't infallible. Every system had weaknesses. Every armor had chinks. I just had to be smart enough to find them and brave enough to exploit them. Derek had made one crucial error. He'd assumed I'd fight him on his terms, in his arena, with his rules, but this wasn't about legal precedent or courtroom strategy anymore. This was about saving my daughters from a man who saw them as pawns in a game only he knew he was playing. The small digital voice recorder felt like a betrayal in my pocket. I'd bought it at an electronics store with cash, feeling like I was crossing some invisible line between protecting my children and spying on them. But Margaret Chen had been clear: without evidence, I had no case. "Daddy, can you help me with my homework?" Emma had asked during our next weekend visit, pulling out worksheets that looked more advanced than anything I remembered from 2nd grade. "Of course, sweetheart. What subject?" "Derek says I need to practice my math facts because I'm falling behind the other kids in my class." She'd said it matter-of-factly, but I could hear Derek's words in her mouth. "He says maybe if I had more structure at home, I'd be doing better." I'd hit record on the device hidden in my shirt pocket. My heart breaking as my daughter unknowingly provided evidence of the systematic campaign against me. Each conversation revealed new layers of Derek's manipulation, subtle suggestions that I wasn't invested in their education, that their academic struggles were somehow connected to our weekend visits, that their future success depended on limiting their time with me. That the research into Derek's background became my obsession. I spent late nights after work diving into court records, bar association documents, local newspaper archives. Derek Martinez was a pillar of the community board member of the Children's Hospital, donor to literacy programs, volunteer youth soccer coach. His public image was flawless, but I'd learned from my years working on cars that sometimes the problem isn't visible from the outside. You have to look deeper, check the components that don't show. The breakthrough came through an unlikely source. Maria Santos, the court clerk who'd processed our original custody agreement, had been working in family court for 20 years. She'd seen Derek in action countless times, and during a chance encounter at the grocery store, she'd given me a piece of advice that changed everything. "That man's good at his job," she'd said carefully, "but he's handled a lot of cases where fathers just ... disappeared, lost interest, stopped fighting. Might be worth talking to some of those other dads. See if they had similar experiences." Finding Derek's former opponents required careful detective work. Court records gave me names, but tracking down men who'd lost custody battles years ago wasn't easy. Many had moved away, changed jobs, started new lives. Some refused to talk, the wounds still too fresh. But a few were willing to share their stories. Tom Bradley had lost custody of his son 3 years ago in a case Derek had handled for his ex-wife. Same playbook. Tom had told me over coffee at a diner outside town. Started with little comments about my work schedule, my apartment, my stability. By the end, my kid looked at me like I was a stranger. Derek's client got full custody, and I got supervised visitation that stopped altogether when my son turned 12 and said he didn't want to see me anymore. James Fletcher's story was even more disturbing. Derek had represented his ex-wife in a case involving allegations of emotional abuse, allegations that were never proven but didn't need to be. "The man's a master of psychological warfare," James had said. "He doesn't just win cases, he destroys fathers. Makes them give up, walk away, disappear from their kids' lives entirely." The pattern was consistent across multiple cases. Derek didn't just practice family law, he weaponized it. He understood that the system favored stability and resources over emotional bonds, and he exploited that bias ruthlessly. I'd started carrying the recorder everywhere, documenting every conversation with the girls, every interaction with Lisa, every subtle way Derek's influence manifested in their behavior. The evidence was accumulating, but it was circumstantial, open to interpretation. The real breakthrough came when I decided to research Derek's personal history. His first marriage had ended in divorce 8 years ago, but the records were sealed. However, divorce proceedings often involved other documents, property transfers, business filings, insurance claims. Patricia Martinez, Derek's ex-wife, had retained her married name but moved to a different state. Finding her contact information took weeks of careful investigation, but when I finally reached her by phone, her response was immediate and telling. "You're dealing with Derek's custody. Manipulation, aren't you? She'd said before I'd even finished explaining why I was calling. Let me guess, your children are starting to pull away. Question whether you really love them. Ask why you can't provide the things their stepfather can. Patricia had lived through Derek's tactics firsthand. During their divorce, he'd used their shared knowledge of family law to systematically document every parenting failure while presenting himself as the more stable, capable parent. When she'd fought back, he'd made the battle so expensive and emotionally draining that she'd eventually accepted an unfavorable settlement just to end the war. He's pathological about winning, she'd explained. It's not enough for him to get what he wants, he has to completely destroy the other side. I've watched him do it to client after client, turning custody battles into total warfare. More importantly, Patricia had kept records. Emails where Derek outlined his strategy for undermining her relationship with their son, recorded conversations where he'd coached her replacement on how to position herself as the children's real mother figure, documentation of a pattern that stretched back years. I've been waiting for someone to finally challenge him. She'd said he's gotten away with this because most fathers eventually give up. They can't afford the fight, can't handle watching their children turn against them, but if you're willing to see this through, I'll help you expose what he really is. The recorder in my pocket had captured my daughter's confused loyalties and manipulated emotions, but Patricia's evidence showed Derek's deliberate, calculated destruction of parent-child relationships across multiple cases. It was the difference between documentation and proof, between suspicion and certainty. Derek had built his career on breaking families apart while maintaining the fiction that he was protecting children. He'd turned the legal system into his personal weapon, using his expertise to exploit the very laws designed to protect families. But every weapon has a weakness, and every predator eventually makes a mistake. Derek's mistake was assuming that all fathers would eventually surrender, that the pain of watching their children turn against them would overwhelm their determination to fight. He'd never faced a father who understood that some battles are worth losing everything to win, because losing them means losing everything anyway. The evidence was mounting, the pattern becoming clear. Derek Martinez wasn't just practicing law, he was destroying lives, one family at a time, and he'd been doing it for years with complete impunity. That was about to change. Mrs. Rodriguez had been Emma and Sophie's teacher for 3 months, but the concern in her eyes when she greeted me at the parent-teacher conference suggested she'd already seen enough to worry her. Her classroom was bright and welcoming, filled with children's artwork and reading corners, but the atmosphere felt heavy as Derek, Lisa, and I arranged ourselves in tiny plastic chairs around her desk. Thank you all for coming, Mrs. Rodriguez began, her gaze moving carefully between the 3 adults. I wanted to discuss some observations I've made about Emma and Sophie's behavior and academic performance. Derek leaned forward, his expensive suit looking ridiculous in the elementary school setting. We appreciate your dedication to their education, Mrs. Rodriguez. Lisa and I are very committed to ensuring the girls reach their full potential. The presumption in his words, Lisa and I, excluded me so naturally that it took my breath away. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed, her eyes flicking to me with what looked like sympathy. Actually, she said, I was hoping to hear from all 3 parents today. The girls have mentioned their father quite a bit, and I understand he's actively involved in their lives. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. Derek is their stepfather, but he's taken a very active role in their upbringing. He has extensive knowledge about child development and education. I see. Mrs. Rodriguez opened a folder filled with papers, artwork assignments, behavioral notes. The reason I called this conference is that I've noticed some concerning changes in both girls over the past few weeks. She spread out several pieces of artwork on the desk. Family drawings that had once included me prominently now showed me as a tiny figure in the corner, if at all. Happy, colorful pictures had been replaced by careful, controlled drawings with muted composition. Emma and Sophie used to be very spontaneous, creative children, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. Lately they've become much more reserved. They ask permission before participating in activities, apologize frequently for things that don't require apologies, and seem anxious about making mistakes. Derek's expression remained neutral, but I caught him exchanging a quick glance with Lisa. Children often go through adjustment periods, he said smoothly. We've been working on teaching them responsibility and appropriate behavior. Perhaps what you're seeing is increased maturity. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out a composition notebook the kind teachers use to track behavioral observations. I've been documenting some specific incidents. Last week, Emma started crying during art time because she was afraid her painting wasn't good enough. When I asked what she meant, she said someone at home had told her that messy art showed poor self-control. My hands clenched in my lap. Derek's influence was reaching into every aspect of my daughter's lives, stealing their confidence and spontaneity even at school. Sophie has been having similar struggles, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. Yesterday, she asked me if it was okay to laugh during story time because she didn't want to be disruptive. These are 7-year-old children. Laughter during story time should be encouraged, not feared. The teacher turned to me directly. Mr. Thompson, the girls often mention their weekends with you. They seem conflicted about these visits. Emma told me last week that she loves spending time with you but worries it makes her mom and Derek sad. That's not, Lisa started to protest, but Mrs. Rodriguez held up a gentle hand. I'm not making accusations, the teacher said carefully. I'm simply sharing what I observe. These children are experiencing some form of emotional stress, and it's affecting their ability to learn and socialize normally. Derek leaned back, his lawyer instincts taking over. Mrs. Rodriguez, we appreciate your concern, but children often say things that adults can misinterpret. Perhaps we should focus on academic performance rather than amateur psychology. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, but Mrs. Rodriguez didn't back down. She'd clearly dealt with difficult parents before. Mr. Martinez, I have a master's degree in elementary education and 15 years of classroom experience. I'm quite capable of recognizing when children are struggling emotionally. She pulled out more paper samples of the girls' handwriting. From the beginning of the school year compared to recent work, the difference was stark. Their early writing had been typical 7-year-old scrawl, enthusiastic and imperfect. Recent samples were careful, controlled, almost mechanical. This level of regression in creative expression usually indicates anxiety or depression, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. These children are afraid to make mistakes, afraid to be themselves. That's not normal development, that's a response to stress. Lisa looked genuinely troubled for the first time. What are you suggesting we do? I'm suggesting that whatever is causing this stress needs to be addressed. Children thrive on consistency and love from all their parent figures. They shouldn't feel conflicted about loving their father or worried about divided loyalties. Derek's mask slipped slightly. Mrs. Rodriguez, I think you're overstepping your bounds here. These children have a stable, loving home environment. If there are issues, they likely stem from other influences. The implication was clear, and Mrs. Rodriguez caught it immediately. Her expression hardened. Mr. Martinez, in my experience, children are happiest when all the adults in their lives work together for their benefit. When they're forced to choose sides or feel guilty about their affections, they suffer academically and emotionally. She closed the folder with finality. I'm recommending that Emma and Sophie see the school counselor. Additionally, I think it would be beneficial if all 3 parents attended a co-parenting workshop. The district offers excellent programs designed to help families navigate these situations. Derek stood abruptly. That won't be necessary. Lisa and I will handle any behavioral issues at home. Thank you for your time. But Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't finished. I'll be documenting my observations and recommendations in the girls' permanent files. If the behavioral changes continue, I may need to involve the school administration and possibly social services. The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Derek's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue with the teacher's right to report concerns about student welfare. As we left the classroom, Derek whispered something to Lisa that I couldn't hear, but her face went pale. In the parking lot, she approached me alone, while Derek waited by their car. Michael, maybe we should talk about adjusting the visitation schedule, she said quietly, just temporarily, until the girls settle down. Lisa, they're upset because they're being forced to choose between loving me and pleasing you and Derek. The solution isn't less time with their father. It's an end to the psychological manipulation. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman. I'd married someone capable of recognizing truth when it was presented clearly. But then Derek called her name, and the moment passed. We'll discuss this later, she said, but her tone suggested the discussion was already over. Driving home, I realized Mrs. Rodriguez had given me something invaluable: professional documentation of Derek's impact on my daughters. Her notes, her observations, her expert opinion, as an educator, would carry weight that my recordings and journals couldn't match. More importantly, she'd seen through Derek's polished presentation to the damage he was causing. In a room full of adults, she'd been the only one brave enough to name the truth. My daughters were suffering, and the adults supposedly protecting them were the cause of their pain. Derek might have legal expertise and financial resources, but he'd made a crucial error. He'd assumed he could manipulate my children without anyone noticing, that his reputation would shield him from scrutiny. He'd forgotten that teachers see everything, and some of them are willing to fight for the children in their care, even when it means confronting powerful parents who'd rather silence inconvenient truths. The resignation letter sat on my supervisor's desk like a white flag of surrender. After 12 years at Morrison's Auto Repair, walking away from my weekend overtime shifts felt like financial suicide. But the custody battle was consuming every spare moment and dollar I had. Mike, you sure about this? Frank Morrison had known me since I started as an apprentice fresh out of trade school. That weekend, work pays your rent. I know Frank, but my daughters are more important than rent money. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already started selling everything I could spare. My motorcycle, my tools that weren't essential for work, the flat-screen TV I'd saved months to buy. The money from those sales would cover rent for a few months while I focused entirely on gathering evidence against Derek. The breaking point had come 3 days after the parent-teacher conference. Emma and Sophie were supposed to spend the weekend with me, our regular every other weekend arrangement. Friday evening came and went with no phone call, no girls, no explanation. When I finally reached Lisa at 8 o'clock, her voice was cold and distant. The girls don't want to come this weekend, Michael. They're upset about the school conference, and Derek thinks it's better if they have some space to process their feelings. They're 7 years old, Lisa. They don't get to decide whether they see their father. Actually, the custody agreement says visitation should be in the children's best interest. If they're expressing reluctance, they're not expressing anything. Derek is expressing it for them. The silence stretched between us, filled with 2 years of accumulated resentment and manipulation. When Lisa spoke again, her voice carried Derek's measured legal tone. Michael, maybe it's time we had an honest conversation about what's best for Emma and Sophie. They're thriving in their current environment. They have stability, educational opportunities, a bright future. Your situation ... isn't providing them with what they need. The words hit like physical blows. My situation, my modest apartment, my working-class job, my inability to compete with Derek's resources all reduced to a situation that was somehow harmful to my children. My situation is being their father, Lisa. That's not something Derek can change. No matter how much money he throws at the problem, he's not trying to replace you, Michael. He's trying to give them the life they deserve. Maybe if you really loved them, you'd want that too. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost fell for it myself. Derek had convinced Lisa that my fighting for my daughters was actually selfishness, that true love would mean stepping aside for their better life. If they don't come this weekend, I'll file a motion for contempt of court. Derek says you won't. He says fathers who threaten legal action rarely follow through, especially when they can't afford the fight. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in my empty apartment, surrounded by the spaces where my daughter's laughter used to echo. Saturday morning felt like a funeral. I'd planned activities, bought groceries for their favorite meals, cleared my schedule for 2 days of focused father-daughter time. Instead, I sat in silence, wondering if Derek was right, if I was being selfish by refusing to disappear from their lives. The doubt was insidious, creeping into every corner of my thoughts. Maybe Emma and Sophie would be better off without the confusion of divided loyalties. Maybe Derek could provide them with opportunities I'd never be able to match. Maybe a father's love wasn't enough when measured against financial security and social advantages. I'd almost convinced myself to call Lisa and agree to reduced visitation when my phone rang. Patricia Martinez, Derek's ex-wife, had been checking in regularly since our first conversation. "How are you holding up?" she asked, and something in my voice must have betrayed my despair. "I think I'm ready to give up, Patricia. Maybe Derek's right. Maybe they're better off without me complicating their lives." "Stop." Her voice was sharp, cutting through my self-pity like a blade. "That's exactly what he wants you to think. That's his endgame, making you believe that loving your children means walking away from them." She told me about Derek's own son, Marcus, from his first marriage, how Derek had used the same tactics on Patricia, making her feel inadequate, making their son feel guilty for loving his mother, how he'd systematically erased Patricia from Marcus's emotional landscape until the boy barely acknowledged her existence. "Marcus is 15 now," Patricia said quietly. "He hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. Derek convinced him I was unstable, selfish, a bad influence. My own son looks at me like I'm a stranger because I got tired of fighting and walked away." The warning was clear. Derek's pattern wasn't just about winning custody battles. It was about completely erasing the other parent from the children's lives. He didn't just want to limit my time with Emma and Sophie. He wanted to eliminate me entirely. "Don't let him do to your daughters what he did to my son," Patricia continued. "Don't let him steal their father because the fight seems too hard. They need you, Michael, even if they can't see it right now." That night, I'd sat in my daughter's empty bedroom, looking at their drawings on the walls, their stuffed animals on the beds, their books on the shelves. This room represented everything I was fighting for, not just time with my children, but their right to love their father without guilt or manipulation. Derek had calculated that I'd eventually surrender, that the emotional and financial cost of fighting would become unbearable. He'd weaponized the legal system, turned my ex-wife against me, and poisoned my daughter's feelings toward me. He'd made every option except surrender seem impossible. But sitting in that quiet room, surrounded by evidence of my daughter's love, I'd realized something Derek hadn't counted on. Some things are worth losing everything to protect. Some battles are worth fighting even when victory seems impossible. My resignation letter wasn't a surrender rate, was a declaration of war. I was giving up my financial security to focus entirely on saving my relationship with my daughters. Derek might have more resources, but he'd never fought a father who had nothing left to lose except his children. The weekend shifts I'd abandoned had been about providing for Emma and Sophie's future. But what good was their future if I wasn't part of it? What value was financial security if it came at the cost of losing their father? Derek had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that making the fight expensive and painful would force me to quit. He'd forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who's been pushed beyond reason, beyond calculation, beyond fear. I wasn't fighting for visitation rights anymore. I was fighting for my daughter's souls. Patricia Martinez's phone number had become my lifeline. Scrawled on a piece of paper and kept in my wallet, it represented the first real hope I'd had since this nightmare began. When she called that Tuesday evening, her voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard before. "Michael, I found something. Something that could change everything." We met at a coffee shop across town, far from Derek's usual haunts. Patricia looked like a woman who'd been through war, tired but determined, carrying a briefcase that suggested she'd come prepared for battle. "I've been going through old files, looking for anything that might help your case," she began, sliding a folder across the table. Derek was meticulous about documenting his strategies, and I kept copies of everything after our divorce. The folder contained printouts of emails between Derek and Lisa, going back months before their marriage. The correspondence revealed a calculated campaign that made my blood run cold. Derek hadn't just fallen in love with Lisa, Hyde targeted her specifically because she was a divorced mother struggling financially. "Look at this one." Patricia pointed to an email dated 6 months before Derek and Lisa's wedding. "He's literally outlining his plan to position himself as the children's primary father figure." The email was clinical in its detail. Children respond to consistency and authority. By establishing clear boundaries and expectations while demonstrating superior resources and stability, we can naturally redirect their primary attachment. The biological father's financial limitations and work schedule make him vulnerable to being repositioned as secondary in their lives. "He studied you, Michael. Your work patterns, your financial situation, your relationship with the girls. This wasn't random. This was a strategic operation." But the most damning evidence was in a series of texts between Derek and his colleague, another family law attorney named Richard Morse. The messages revealed that Derek had used similar tactics, in other cases, not just as an attorney, but in his personal life. "This is his pattern," Patricia explained. "He targets divorced mothers with children, especially those struggling financially. He provides stability and resources while systematically undermining the father's relationship with the kids. I'm his second wife, but there was another before me, a woman named Jennifer Walsh." Patricia had tracked down Jennifer, who'd been married to Derek briefly 3 years before Patricia. Jennifer had 2 young sons from a previous relationship, and Derek had used the same playbook, gradually alienating the children from their biological father while positioning himself as their savior. Jennifer's ex-husband eventually gave up fighting, Patricia continued, moved to another state, sees his kids maybe once a year now. The boys barely remember him. Derek got what he wanted, a ready-made family with no competition from the biological father. The pattern was chilling in its consistency. Derek didn't just practice family law, he lived it, using his professional expertise to systematically destroy father-child relationships in his personal life. He collected families like trophies, erasing inconvenient biological fathers, and replacing them with himself. "There's more," Patricia said, pulling out another document. "I hired a private investigator to look into Derek's professional conduct. He's faced 3 disciplinary inquiries in the past 5 years, all related to allegations of conflict of interest and client manipulation. The disciplinary records were mostly sealed, but the investigator had found enough to establish a pattern of ethical violations. Derek had a history of taking cases where he had personal connections to the opposing party, using his inside knowledge to gain unfair advantages, and coaching clients on how to manipulate custody evaluations. None of the complaints resulted in serious sanctions because Derek's too connected, too careful about covering his tracks, but the pattern is there." Patricia leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Michael, I want to help you take him down. Not just for your daughters, but for all the families he's destroyed. For my son, who barely acknowledges I exist. For Jennifer's boys, who think their father abandoned them. For every man who's been erased from his children's lives by Derek's manipulation." She'd already retained a private investigator with expertise in family law misconduct. She'd contacted other fathers who'd lost custody cases involving Derek, several of whom were willing to testify about similar experiences. Most importantly, she'd documented Derek's history of using the same tactics across multiple relationships and cases. "I can't get my son back," Patricia said, her voice breaking slightly. "Marcus is too old, too thoroughly convinced that I'm the villain in his story. But your girls are young enough that the damage might be reversible. If we can expose Derek's pattern, show the court that this isn't about what's best for the children, but about his pathological need to control and possess." The plan she outlined was comprehensive and risky. We'd need to document Derek's current manipulation while building a case that showed his historical pattern of parental alienation. It would require coordination between multiple attorneys, expert witnesses in child psychology and parental alienation, and potentially exposing Derek's professional misconduct to the state bar. "It won't be cheap," Patricia admitted, "but I'm willing to fund this fight. Consider it an investment in justice. Derek's been getting away with destroying families for too long." The offer was staggering, not just financial support, but access to Patricia's network of investigators, attorneys, and expert witnesses. She'd been building a case against Derek for years, waiting for the right opportunity to expose him. "Why now?" I asked. Why are you willing to risk everything for my daughters? Patricia's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for years. Because I see my son in Emma and Sophie. I see the confusion, the manipulation, the slow erosion of their love for their father. I couldn't save Marcus, but maybe I can save them. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a teenage boy with Derek's confident smile and Patricia's eyes, standing beside Derek at some formal event. The boy's body language spoke volumes. He belonged to Derek now, completely and irrevocably. That was taken last month at Derek's law firm's charity gala, Patricia said quietly. Marcus introduced Derek as his real father to everyone there. 15 years old, and he's already learned to erase me from his own history. The pain in her voice was raw, devastating. Derek hadn't just won custody, I'd stolen her son's heart and rewritten his emotional history. Marcus genuinely believed his mother was irrelevant to his life, that Derek was his true parent. I won't let him do that to your girls, Patricia continued. And maybe, if we expose what he really is, other fathers won't have to go through what you're experiencing. Driving home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Patricia had given me more than evidence and financial support. She'd given me validation that Derek's behavior wasn't normal, wasn't acceptable, and wasn't unstoppable. But more than that, she'd shown me the stakes of this battle. If I failed, Emma and Sophie wouldn't just spend less time with me, they'd eventually forget they ever loved me at all. Derek's endgame wasn't shared custody, or even primary custody. It was complete emotional adoption, turning my daughters into children who genuinely believed their stepfather was their real father. Patricia's phone number in my wallet represented more than an alliance, it represented a second chance to save my daughters from a fate that had already claimed too many children. Derek had been counting on my isolation, my inability to see the broader pattern of his manipulation. He'd assumed I'd fight alone. Overwhelmed by his resources and expertise, he'd never counted on facing the one person who knew his tactics better than anyone, the woman whose family he'd already destroyed, and who was determined not to let him destroy another. The private investigator's report arrived in a manila envelope that felt like it contained dynamite. Sarah Chuno, relation to my attorney Margaret, was a former police detective who specialized in family law investigations. Patricia had hired her to dig deeper into Derek's professional and personal history, and what she'd found was devastating. Derek Martinez has been playing this game for over a decade, Sarah explained during our meeting at her office. The walls were covered with case boards, timelines, and photographs that told the story of systematic family destruction. He's not just a lawyer who happens to manipulate custody cases, he's a predator who uses the legal system as his hunting ground. The financial analysis was staggering. Derek's lifestyle far exceeded what a family law attorney should reasonably afford, even a successful one. The house in Willowbrook Estates, the luxury cars, the private school tuition, the expensive vacations, it all suggested income sources beyond his legal practice. Look at these expenditures. Sarah pointed to a detailed spreadsheet. He's spending roughly twice what his declared income should support. Either he's hiding assets or he's financing this lifestyle through his manipulation of clients and custody cases. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of Derek taking large retainers from wealthy clients, then prolonging their cases unnecessarily to maximize his fees. Several former clients had filed complaints about excessive billing and questionable legal strategies that seemed designed more to generate revenue than achieve results. But the most disturbing discovery was Derek's systematic documentation of his parental alienation tactics. Patricia's access to his personal files had revealed folders labeled by case number, containing detailed notes on how to undermine father-child relationships. He's literally written instruction manuals, Sarah said, spreading out photocopied pages. Step-by-step guides on how to coach children to reject their fathers, how to document concerning behavior, how to position stepfathers as superior alternatives. One document, titled Effective Custody Modification Strategies, read like a psychological warfare manual. It outlined techniques for making children question their father's love, for positioning financial struggles as evidence of inadequate parenting, for creating documentation that would support custody changes. The man's a sociopath, Sarah continued, but he's a smart sociopath. Everything he does is technically legal, carefully crafted to avoid obvious ethical violations while achieving maximum emotional damage. The investigation had also uncovered Derek's relationship with Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who frequently testified in his cases. The two had a professional relationship that appeared to cross ethical boundaries. Dr. Foster consistently provided evaluations that supported Derek's clients, regardless of the actual family dynamics. Foster's reports all follow the same template, Sarah explained, showing me several psychological evaluations from different cases. She always finds reasons to recommend limiting the father's custody while praising the stepfather's influence. The language is almost identical across multiple families. Bank records obtained through Patricia's divorce discovery process showed regular payments from Derek's firm to Dr. Foster's practice, far exceeding what normal expert witness fees should total. The financial relationship suggested a level of coordination that bordered on conspiracy. We're not just looking at custody manipulation anymore, Sarah said grimly. This appears to be an organized scheme involving multiple professionals, lawyers, psychologists, potentially judges, all working together to systematically favor certain outcomes in custody cases. The scope of Derek's network was becoming clear. He'd cultivated relationships with court-appointed mediators, child advocates, and family counselors who consistently recommended his preferred outcomes. The system that was supposed to protect children had been corrupted into a machine for destroying father-child relationships. But Sarah had found Derek's weakness, his compulsive need to document his successes. His personal files contained case summaries that read like trophies, detailed accounts of fathers he'd eliminated from their children's lives. The pride he took in these victories had led him to create evidence of his systematic manipulation. Look at this one, Sarah said, pointing to a file labeled Thompson Case Strategy Notes. My own name at the top of a folder dedicated to destroying my relationship with my daughters was like a punch to the gut. The notes were clinical and detailed. Subject shows strong emotional attachment to children but lacks financial resources to compete effectively. Strategy: emphasize stability, differential, document behavioral concerns during transitions. Coach children to express preferences for structured environment. Timeline: 6 to 8 months for complete alienation. Complete alienation. Derek hadn't been trying to limit my custody, I'd been planning to eliminate it entirely. The timeline suggested he'd expected Emma and Sophie to reject me completely within 8 months of his marriage to Lisa. The good news, Sarah continued, is that he's documented everything. His own files prove intent to manipulate your children's emotions and destroy your relationship with them. This isn't a case of what's best for the children, this is evidence of calculated psychological abuse. Sarah had also tracked down 3 other fathers who'd been targeted by Derek's network over the past 5 years. 2 had completely lost contact with their children. 1 had moved out of state after Derek's manipulation made his life unbearable. All 3 were willing to testify about identical patterns of alienation and systematic exclusion. We're building a RICO case, Sarah explained. Racketeering, an ongoing criminal enterprise designed to defraud families and manipulate the court system. Derek's not just unethical. What he's doing may actually be criminal. The evidence was overwhelming, but Sarah warned me about Derek's likely response. He's going to fight dirty. He has connections throughout the legal system, and he'll use every one of them to discredit you and protect himself. The most damaging evidence was a recorded conversation between Derek and Dr. Foster, captured during Patricia's own custody battle years earlier. In it, Derek explicitly discussed coaching children to express negative feelings about their fathers, regardless of the actual relationship quality. The key is making it seem like their natural preference, Derek's voice said on the recording. Children are suggestible. If you consistently frame the father as unstable, unreliable, or harmful to their well-being, they'll eventually internalize that narrative and express it as their own feelings. Dr. Foster's response was equally chilling. I can document behavioral indicators that support whatever custody arrangement you're seeking. Children display anxiety in many situations. The trick is attributing that anxiety to the appropriate source. Sarah had enhanced the audio quality and verified its authenticity through multiple technical analyses. The recording was admissible evidence that proved Derek and his network weren't just advocating for clients, they were manufacturing false evidence and coaching children to lie about their feelings. This recording alone could destroy Derek's career and potentially send him to prison, Sarah said, but we need to be strategic about how we use it. Once we reveal this evidence, Derek will know we have access to Patricia's files, and he'll move to suppress everything else. The investigation had also uncovered Derek's financial vulnerabilities. His lavish lifestyle was supported by a house of cards, multiple mortgages, credit lines secured by his professional reputation, and investment partnerships that required maintaining his status in the legal community. If Derek loses his law license, his entire financial empire collapses, Sarah explained. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, it's all leveraged against his ability to practice law. This gives us significant leverage in negotiations. Patricia had been funding the investigation through a shell company, ensuring that Derek couldn't trace the money back to her until we were ready to reveal her involvement. The strategy was designed to let Derek believe he was facing an isolated father, with limited resources, keeping him overconfident until we could present the full scope of evidence against him. We're going to give Derek a choice, Sarah concluded. He can voluntarily step back from your family, cease all alienation activities, and accept a custody arrangement that protects your relationship with your daughters. Or we can expose everything: his professional misconduct, his criminal conspiracy, his systematic destruction of families, and let the legal system destroy him. The folder Sarah handed me contained enough evidence to end Derek's career and potentially send him to prison. Financial fraud, witness tampering, conspiracy to manipulate court proceedings, professional misconduct, spanning multiple cases and years. It was comprehensive, devastating, and absolutely conclusive. But looking through the evidence, I felt a mixture of triumph and sadness. This vindication had come at enormous cost not just to me, but to all the families Derek had destroyed over the years. Patricia's son, Jennifer's boys, countless other children who'd been manipulated into rejecting fathers who loved them. The question now, Sarah said, is how you want to proceed. We can file criminal complaints, professional misconduct charges, and civil suits that will destroy Derek completely. Or we can use this evidence as leverage to force him to back down and restore your relationship with your daughters. The choice was mine, but the implications were enormous. Destroying Derek might prevent future victims, but it would also create chaos in Emma and Sophie's lives. Using the evidence as leverage might save my relationship with my daughters while allowing Derek to potentially target other families in the future. There's one more thing, Sarah said, pulling out a final document. Derek's been planning to relocate. He's been negotiating a partnership with a law firm in California, probably as an escape route in case his local activities were ever exposed. If we don't act soon, he might disappear with your daughters before we can stop him. The timeline had suddenly compressed. Derek wasn't just trying to eliminate me from my daughters' lives, he was planning to physically remove them from my reach. Entirely, the custody battle had become a race against time, with my children's future hanging in the balance. Sarah's investigation had given me the weapons to fight Derek on equal terms, but it had also revealed the true scope of his plans. This wasn't just about custody anymore, it was about preventing the complete disappearance of my daughters from my life forever. The State Bar disciplinary record arrived through Sarah's legal contacts, marked confidential attorney eyes only. Derek Martinez's professional conduct file was thicker than I'd expected, revealing a pattern of ethical violations stretching back to his early career. 3 formal complaints in 5 years, all related to custody cases, all mysteriously resolved with minimal sanctions despite serious allegations. Sarah spread the documents across her conference table like playing cards, each one revealing another layer of Derek's systematic corruption. Look at the pattern, she said, pointing to dates and case numbers. Every complaint involves the same basic allegation: Derek manipulating evidence, coaching witnesses, or using his position to gain unfair advantages in custody disputes. The first complaint, filed 3 years ago, involved a father named Robert Chen who'd accused Derek of suborning perjury by coaching his ex-wife to make false abuse allegations. The investigation had been conducted by Derek's golf partner on the bar's disciplinary committee. Case dismissed. No sanctions imposed. The second complaint was more serious. Derek had represented a mother seeking to relocate with her children to another state, despite clear evidence that the move would devastate the father's relationship with his kids. The father's attorney had presented evidence that Derek had manufactured a job offer for his client, creating false justification for the relocation. This one should have resulted in suspension, Sarah noted. Manufacturing evidence is a serious ethical violation. But look who conducted the investigation. Judge Patricia Hawkins, who's received campaign contributions from Derek's firm for the past 6 election cycles. The third complaint was the most disturbing. Derek had been accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a court-appointed child advocate while representing a client in a high-conflict custody case. The advocate had consistently recommended outcomes favoring Derek's clients, regardless of the evidence presented. The advocate was quietly transferred to another county, Sarah explained. Derek received a private reprimand that was sealed from public view. No one involved faced serious consequences. But Sarah had found something the disciplinary committee had missed. Financial records showing regular payments from Derek's firm to shell companies owned by the court-appointed advocate. The payments continued for months after the case was resolved, suggesting ongoing compensation for favorable testimony. This isn't just unethical behavior, Sarah said grimly. This is systematic corruption of the judicial process. Derek's been buying favorable outcomes in custody cases for years. The investigation had also revealed Derek's connection to a network of professionals who regularly testified in his cases. Dr. Amanda Foster was just one piece of a larger puzzle that included custody of child advocates, and even some judges who consistently ruled in favor of Derek's clients. We're looking at organized corruption, Sarah continued. A group of professionals who figured out how to manipulate the family court system for profit. Derek's not just a corrupt lawyer, he's the coordinator of a criminal enterprise. But the most damaging discovery was in Derek's personal files, which Patricia had retained copies of after their divorce. His computer records showed he'd been blackmailing some of his targets, using their personal information to force compliance with his demands. Look at this, Sarah said, showing me a spreadsheet labeled insurance policies. It contained personal details about fathers Derek had targeted, financial struggles, relationship problems, past mistakes, all cataloged for potential use as leverage. My own name was on the list, with notes about my work schedule, my modest income, and even details about my knee injury that ended my football career. Derek had researched my background thoroughly, looking for vulnerabilities he could exploit in court. He's been building files on every father he targets, Sarah explained, creating psychological profiles, identifying weaknesses, planning systematic campaigns to destroy their credibility and their relationships with their children. The files also revealed Derek's long-term strategy for my family. He'd been planning to relocate to California from the beginning, using the move to permanently separate Emma and Sophie from me. The relocation would be presented as a career opportunity for Lisa, but the real goal was putting 3,000 miles between me and my daughters. This explains the timeline, Sarah said. Derek's been working toward this relocation from the day he married your ex. Every step, the alienation, the custody restrictions, the documentation of your inadequacies, has been building toward a case for relocation that would effectively end your relationship with your daughters. But Sarah had also found evidence of Derek's growing carelessness. His success had made him overconfident, leading him to document strategies and tactics that would destroy him if exposed. The files contained detailed records of his manipulation techniques, financial arrangements with corrupt professionals, and even recordings of conversations where he explicitly discussed destroying father-child relationships. Criminals always get sloppy when they think they're untouchable, Sarah observed. Derek's documented everything because he never thought anyone would be in a position to expose him. Patricia's access to his files has given us a roadmap to his entire operation. The evidence was overwhelming, but Sarah warned that Derek's network would fight back aggressively once they realized the scope of the investigation. These people have been operating with impunity for years. They're not going to surrender quietly. She'd already identified 3 judges who appeared to be part of Derek's network, consistently ruling in favor of his clients, despite questionable evidence. Exposing the corruption would require careful coordination with federal investigators and possibly the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. This is bigger than your custody case now, Sarah said. We're looking at a conspiracy that's affected dozens of families over multiple years. The evidence you've helped us gather could lead to criminal prosecutions and a complete overhaul of the family court system in this county, but the personal stakes remained the highest. Derek's files showed that his California relocation plan was accelerating. He'd already secured a position with a prestigious Los Angeles firm and was preparing to petition for permission to relocate with the children. We have maybe 6 weeks before Derek makes his move, Sarah warned. Once he files for relocation, everything changes. Even if we expose his corruption, he might be able to complete the move before the legal system can stop him. The disciplinary records had revealed Derek's vulnerability. His entire career was built on corruption that could be proven with the evidence we'd gathered, but they'd also shown his desperation. As his network began to unravel, he was preparing to disappear with my daughters, knowing that distance would make it nearly impossible for me to maintain any meaningful relationship with them. The battle for Emma and Sophie had become a race against time, with Derek's criminal enterprise crumbling around him but my daughters still trapped in the middle of his final, desperate gambit for escape. Sarah handed me a secure phone. From now on, we communicate only through encrypted channels. Derek's network includes people with access to court records, law enforcement databases, even personal information. We have to assume they'll use every resource available to protect themselves. Looking at Derek's disciplinary file, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my daughters anymore. I was fighting to expose a criminal conspiracy that had destroyed countless families, corrupted the judicial system, and turned children into weapons against their own parents. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, and irrefutable. Derek Martinez wasn't just an unethical lawyer, he was the architect of a systematic program to destroy father-child relationships for profit. Now I had to stop him before he disappeared with my daughters forever. The confrontation happened in the most public place I could imagine, the parking lot of Emma and Sophie's school, surrounded by security cameras and dozens of witnesses. I'd been waiting for Derek to pick up the girls, knowing that his routine was as precise as everything else in his manufactured life. Sarah had coached me carefully. Let him reveal himself. Don't accuse him of anything specific, just ask questions and let his arrogance do the work. The cameras will capture everything, and his reaction will tell us exactly who we're dealing with. Derek emerged from his luxury sedan, wearing his usual armor of expensive clothes and calculated confidence. He saw me immediately but continued, walking toward the school entrance, probably hoping to avoid any interaction. That's when I stepped into his path. Derek, I think we need to talk. His eyes flicked around the parking lot, calculating witnesses and escape routes. Michael, this isn't appropriate. If you have concerns about the custody arrangement, you should contact your attorney. I'm not here about custody. I'm here about parental alienation. The words hit like physical blows. Derek's practiced smile faltered for just a moment before reassembling itself. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you know exactly what I mean. The systematic manipulation of my daughters' feelings toward me. The coaching, the psychological warfare disguised as child welfare. Derek's posture changed subtly, shoulders squaring, jaw tightening. The mask of reasonable concern was slipping, revealing something harder underneath. Michael, I understand. You're frustrated with your situation, but making wild accusations isn't going to help your relationship with Emma and Sophie. My situation? You mean having my children turned against me by a man who's made a career of destroying families? I think you're having some kind of emotional breakdown, Derek said, his voice carrying the condescending tone he probably used. In courtrooms, Lisa and I are concerned about your mental state. Perhaps you should consider counseling. The gaslighting was automatic, reflexive. Even confronted directly, Derek's first instinct was to make me question my own perceptions too, position my legitimate concerns as evidence of instability. Tell me about Patricia, I said quietly. Derek went completely still. For the first time since I'd known him, his composure cracked visibly. What about Patricia? Tell me about how you used the same tactics on her that you're using on me. How you turned Marcus against his mother until he barely acknowledges she exists. Derek's face flushed red, and I could see his hands clenching into fists. You don't know anything about my previous marriage. I know you documented your strategies. I know you wrote instruction manuals on how to alienate children from their parents. I know you've been running this same con for years. You're delusional. But Derek's voice had lost its smooth confidence. He was speaking louder now, drawing attention from other parents in the parking lot. You're a bitter ex-husband who can't accept that his children prefer stability over chaos. Is that what you told Patricia when you stole her son? Is that what you told Jennifer Walsh when you erased her boy's father from their lives? Derek took a step closer, and for a moment I thought he might actually attack me physically. His face was contorted with rage, all pretense of professional civility abandoned. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Thompson. You're a nobody, a mechanic, who can't even afford a decent lawyer. You think you can threaten me? The transformation was complete. The reasonable stepfather concerned about children's welfare had vanished, replaced by someone capable of genuine violence. Security cameras captured every second as Derek's true nature revealed itself. I think you've been getting away with destroying families for so long that you forgot some fathers won't just walk away quietly, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Walk away. Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're going to do more than walk away. By the time I'm finished with you, you'll be lucky to get supervised visitation once a month. Your daughters will think of you as a cautionary tale of the unstable biological father who couldn't provide for them. Other parents had stopped their conversations, sensing the tension. A security guard from the school was walking toward us. Derek noticed the attention and tried to reassemble his mask of respectability, but it was too late. Too many people had seen his true face. You're making a mistake, Michael, he said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I have resources you can't imagine. I have connections throughout the legal system. I can make your life very difficult. More difficult than having my children manipulated into hating me. They don't hate you, Derek said with a cruel smile. They're just learning that you're irrelevant, that their real father is the one who can actually take care of them. The words were like ice water in my veins. Derek wasn't just trying to limit my custody, he was planning to completely replace me in my daughters' lives, to rewrite their emotional history until they genuinely believed he was their father, and I was just a mistake from their mothers. Past, is that what you told Marcus? That his real father was the one who could take care of him? Derek's face went white with rage. Leave my son out of this. Your son. He's Patricia's son. You just stole him. Derek grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic piece of garbage. Your daughters are going to have a wonderful life in California with their mother and me. You're going to fade into a distant memory, the biological father who couldn't cut it in the real world. California. He'd just confirmed Sarah's intelligence about the relocation plan. The security cameras had captured not just Derek's threatening behavior, but his admission that he was planning to take my daughters out of state. California sounds nice, I said calmly. I'm sure the California State Bar will be very interested in your professional conduct record. Derek released my arm like it was on fire. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized he'd revealed too much, confirmed too many of our suspicions. You're fishing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You don't have anything, don't I? The security guard reached us just as Derek was backing away, his confident facade completely shattered. Everything okay here, gentlemen? Just a misunderstanding, Derek said quickly, already moving toward his car. Mr. Thompson was just leaving, but I wasn't leaving. I stood in that parking lot watching Derek speed away, knowing that the cameras had captured everything: his threats, his admissions, his complete loss of control when confronted with the truth about his systematic manipulation. Sarah had been right. Derek's arrogance was his weakness. Faced with someone who knew the scope of his activities, he'd abandoned all pretense and revealed exactly who he really was, not a concerned stepfather, but a predator who collected families and erased inconvenient biological fathers. The confrontation had served its purpose. We now had video evidence of Derek's threatening behavior, his admission about the California relocation, and most importantly, his complete loss of composure when faced with exposure. But as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the image of Derek's final threat. He'd spoken about my daughter's future in California with such certainty, such ownership. To him, Emma and Sophie weren't children caught in a custody dispute. They were possessions he was planning to take with him when he fled the wreckage of his criminal enterprise. The battle lines were drawn. Derek knew I was a threat to his operation, and I knew he was planning to disappear with my daughters. The only question was whether we could expose him and stop the relocation before he managed to take Emma and Sophie beyond my reach forever. Time was running out, and Derek Martinez had just shown me exactly how dangerous a cornered predator could be. The emergency custody motion sat on Judge Harrison's desk like a ticking bomb. 47 pages of evidence, witness statements, and documentation that would either save my daughters or destroy my last chance to be their father. Margaret Chen had worked around the clock to prepare the filing, knowing we had only days before Derek's relocation plan became irreversible. This is unprecedented. Margaret had warned me the night before the hearing. We're not just asking for custody modification. We're accusing a respected attorney of systematic parental alienation and professional misconduct. If we're wrong, Derek will bury us in lawsuits and sanctions. But we weren't wrong. Sarah's investigation had provided irrefutable evidence of Derek's pattern of manipulation, and Patricia's testimony would corroborate everything. The question was whether Judge Harrison would have the courage to rule against someone as connected as Derek Martinez. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Word had leaked about the nature of our allegations, and the legal community had turned out to watch what everyone knew would be a career-defining case for someone. Either Derek would be exposed as a criminal, or I would be destroyed as a vindictive father making desperate accusations. Derek entered with his usual entourage to junior partners from his firm, a court reporter he'd apparently retained separately, and Dr. Amanda Foster, the psychologist whose ethics we were also challenging. His confidence seemed unshaken, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he arranged his papers. Lisa sat in the gallery behind Derek's table, looking like a woman who'd suddenly realized she was trapped in someone else's nightmare. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Doubt. The confrontation in the school parking lot had apparently caused some uncomfortable conversations at home. Your Honor, Margaret began, we're here today because Emma and Sophie Thompson are victims of a systematic campaign of parental alienation orchestrated by Derek Martinez. This is not a typical custody dispute. This is evidence of psychological child abuse disguised as child advocacy. Derek's attorney, Richard Morse, objected immediately. Your Honor, these are serious allegations being made without foundation by a desperate father who's lost the respect of his own children through his own inadequacies. Judge Harrison was a 20-year veteran of family court who'd seen every variety of custody battle imaginable. His reputation for fairness was legendary, but so was his impatience with frivolous accusations. Ms. Chen, these are extraordinary claims. I trust you have extraordinary evidence. We do, Your Honor. Margaret's presentation was methodical and devastating. She started with Derek's own files, the strategy documents that outlined his plan to eliminate me from my daughters' lives. The language was clinical, detached, describing children's emotions as variables to be manipulated rather than feelings to be protected. Subject shows strong emotional attachment to children but lacks financial resources to compete effectively. Margaret read from Derek's notes. Strategy, emphasize stability, differential, document behavioral concerns during transitions, coach children to express preferences for structured environment. Timeline, 6 to 8 months for complete alienation. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of the court reporter's pen. Even Derek's supporters seemed stunned by the cold calculation revealed in his own words. Patricia's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of our case. She described Derek's identical tactics in their marriage, his systematic erosion of her relationship with Marcus, and the devastating effectiveness of his psychological manipulation. He doesn't just want to win custody cases, Patricia said, her voice steady despite obvious pain. He wants to completely erase the other parent from the children's emotional lives. My son genuinely believes I was a bad mother who abandoned him. Derek didn't just change our custody arrangement, he rewrote my child's entire understanding of his own history. Derek's cross-examination of Patricia was brutal, but ultimately counterproductive. His questions revealed an intimate knowledge of her psychological vulnerabilities and parenting struggles that no ethical attorney should have possessed. He was essentially proving our point about his systematic collection and weaponization of personal information. The recording of Derek and Dr. Foster discussing their coordination was perhaps the most damning evidence. Hearing Derek's voice calmly, discussing how to manufacture psychological evaluations that would support predetermined outcomes left the courtroom in stunned silence. The key is making it seem like their natural preference. Derek's recorded voice filled the courtroom. Children are sick. If you consistently frame the father as unstable, unreliable, or harmful to their well-being, they'll eventually internalize that narrative and express it as their own feelings. Judge Harrison's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. When Margaret presented the financial records showing Derek's payments to supposedly independent evaluators, his jaw tightened visibly. But Derek's counterattack was swift and vicious. He portrayed me as an unstable father who'd become obsessed with conspiracy theories, rather than accepting his own inadequacies. He presented my confrontation in the school parking lot as evidence of threatening behavior, carefully editing the context to make me appear unhinged. Mr. Thompson has become so consumed with blame and resentment that he's fabricated an elaborate conspiracy theory rather than acknowledge his own shortcomings as a father. Morse argued, his children have naturally gravitated toward stability and success, and he's responding with increasingly desperate and potentially dangerous behavior. Dr. Foster's testimony attempted to reframe Derek's documented strategies as standard child advocacy techniques taken out of context. She claimed that children naturally prefer structured environments and that my daughter's emotional distance from me was a predictable response to the chaos and uncertainty I brought to their lives. Children are remarkably perceptive, Dr. Foster said. They respond to consistency, stability, and emotional security when they express preferences for spending more time with Mr. Martinez and less time with their biological father. We should listen to their voices rather than dismissing their feelings as manipulation. But Margaret's cross-examination revealed the flaws in Dr. Foster's testimony. She'd evaluated dozens of children in Derek's cases, and her recommendations were identical regardless of the actual family dynamics. Her reports followed templates that always favored Derek's clients, regardless of evidence to the contrary. Dr. Foster, in your professional opinion, is it normal for a 7-year-old child to spontaneously use phrases like inappropriate emotional boundaries or destabilizing influence when describing their father? Children sometimes adopt language they hear from adults. Yes, they do. The question is which adults they're hearing it from. The most powerful moment came when Margaret played the recording of Emma asking me why I didn't really love them anymore. The pain in my daughter's voice, the confusion of a child forced to question her father's love, brought tears to several observers' eyes. This is not a child expressing natural preferences, Margaret argued. This is a child repeating questions and doubts that have been systematically planted in her mind by adults who are supposed to protect her emotional well-being. Derek's final argument was a masterpiece of legal manipulation that proved our point about his tactics. He questioned my stability, my financial capability, my commitment to my daughter's welfare. Every criticism was reasonable on its surface, but designed to create cumulative doubt about my fitness as a father. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson's conspiracy theories and increasingly erratic behavior demonstrate exactly why the children have naturally gravitated toward a more stable environment. We're not seeing parental alienation, we're seeing children making rational choices about their own welfare. But Judge Harrison had heard enough. His ruling was swift and decisive. This court finds credible evidence of systematic parental alienation designed to undermine the children's relationship with their biological father. The documentation presented suggests a calculated campaign to manipulate these children's emotions and loyalties for reasons that appear unrelated to their actual welfare. The emergency order was everything we'd hoped for. Immediate suspension of Derek's unsupervised contact with Emma and Sophie, mandatory family therapy with a psychologist who had no connection to Derek's network, prohibition on any relocation without specific court approval. Most importantly, restoration of my full visitation rights with immediate effect. Derek's face was white with rage as Judge Harrison continued. Additionally, this court is referring the evidence presented today to the State Bar for investigation into potential professional misconduct. Dr. Forster's license will also be reviewed by the appropriate authorities. As the courtroom cleared, Lisa approached me for the first time in months. Her eyes were red with tears and exhaustion. Michael, I'm so sorry I didn't know. I thought Derek was helping the girls, making their lives better. I didn't realize what he was doing to their relationship with you. The apology was devastating in its sincerity. Lisa hadn't been Derek's partner in crime. She'd been another victim, manipulated just as systematically as our daughters. Derek had used her legitimate concerns about financial stability and security to turn her against me, making her complicit in his campaign without her understanding the true scope of his manipulation. But while we'd won this battle, the war was far from over. Derek's network was exposed but not destroyed. His relocation plans were blocked but not abandoned. Most importantly, Emma and Sophie were still caught in the middle of a conflict they didn't understand. Their emotions and loyalties damaged by months of systematic manipulation. The legal victory felt hollow as I realized the hardest work was just beginning rebuilding my daughter's trust, repairing the damage Derek had done to their understanding of love and loyalty, and proving that their father had never stopped fighting for them, even when they'd been taught to believe he didn't care. Judge Harrison's ruling had given me back my legal rights as a father. Now I had to win back my daughter's hearts. Dr. Rebecca Walsh's office felt like a sanctuary after months of legal battles and emotional warfare, court-appointed and completely independent of Derek's network. She specialized in parental alienation cases and had a reputation for helping children navigate the complex emotions that resulted from adult manipulation. Emma and Sophie sat on either side of me on the couch, but their body language told the story of months of systematic alienation. They were physically present but emotionally distant, like guests in their own father's presence. Dr. Walsh observed everything with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen this damage before. Girls, can you tell me how you've been feeling about seeing your dad again? Dr. Walsh's voice was gentle, non-threatening. Sophie, always the more talkative twin, looked at Emma before answering. It's confusing. Derek says Daddy loves us, but he also says Daddy can't take care of us the way we need. What do you think, Emma? Emma's response broke my heart. I don't want to make anyone sad. When I'm happy with Daddy, it makes Derek and Mommy worried. When I'm sad with Daddy, it makes Daddy worried. I don't know how to feel anymore. Dr. Walsh's session notes would later become crucial evidence of the psychological damage Derek's manipulation had caused. Emma and Sophie weren't just confused about custody arrangements, they'd been taught that loving their father was somehow disloyal to their mother and stepfather. It sounds like you've been given some very grown-up worries that children shouldn't have to carry, Dr. Walsh said. Loving your daddy doesn't make your mommy and Derek sad. Adults sometimes have complicated feelings, but that's not your job to fix. Over the following weeks, Dr. Walsh's sessions revealed the full scope of Derek's psychological manipulation. The girls had been systematically taught to question their memories of happy times with me, to interpret my financial struggles as evidence that I didn't care about them, and to feel guilty for enjoying our time together. Derek told us that if we really loved Mommy, we wouldn't want to make her worry about us when we're with Daddy. Sophie had confided during one session. He said good daughters put their mother's happiness first. The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel. Derek had weaponized the girls' natural desire to please the adults in their lives, turning their love for their mother into a tool for rejecting their father. He'd made them believe that divided loyalty was actually disloyalty, that loving me meant hurting Lisa. But children are remarkably resilient when given permission to feel their natural emotions. As Dr. Walsh's sessions continued, Emma and Sophie began to remember what their relationship with me had been like before Derek's influence. The paper airplane races, the pancake breakfasts, the fort-building adventures memories that had been buried under months of suggested doubt began to resurface. The breakthrough came during our fourth session together. Emma had been describing a recent weekend at Derek's house when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Dr. Walsh, why did Derek say Daddy was selfish for working so much, when Derek works even more hours than Daddy does? The question revealed that Emma was beginning to think critically about the narratives she'd been fed. Derek's contradictions were becoming apparent as she gained distance from his constant influence. What do you think, Emma? I think maybe Derek just wanted us to think bad things about Daddy, but I remember Daddy working extra so we could go to the movies and buy ice cream. That doesn't seem selfish. Dr. Walsh's reports documented the girls' gradual recovery from Derek's manipulation. Their anxiety levels decreased significantly when they were given explicit permission to love both parents without guilt. Their spontaneity returned as they realized they wouldn't be punished for laughing too loudly or making messes during creative play. But the community response to Derek's exposure was equally important. Other fathers who'd lost custody battles involving Derek began coming forward with similar stories. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about corruption in the family court system. Legal aid organizations offered support to families who'd been victimized by Derek's network. Tom Bradley, who'd lost custody of his son 3 years earlier, contacted me after reading about our case. I always knew something wasn't right about how that case went, he said, but Derek's reputation was so solid, I thought the problem was me. With Dr. Walsh's documentation of parental alienation and the legal system's recognition of Derek's misconduct, Tom was able to petition for restoration of his custody rights. Other fathers followed suit, creating a wave of custody modifications that exposed the full scope of Derek's systematic family destruction. The state bar investigation was moving swiftly. Derek's own files provided a roadmap to his unethical conduct, and Patricia's testimony corroborated patterns of behavior spanning multiple cases. Dr. Foster was also under investigation, with several of her psychological evaluations being reviewed for evidence of bias and misconduct. But Derek wasn't surrendering quietly. His counterattack focused on discrediting the evidence against him and portraying himself as the victim of a vindictive conspiracy led by bitter ex-spouses and bad and inadequate fathers. He'd hired a high-profile criminal defense attorney and was fighting the bar investigation with every resource at his disposal. The local legal community was divided. Derek's supporters argued that he was being persecuted for his success in representing mothers and children against inadequate fathers. They painted him as a champion of family stability who was being destroyed by men who couldn't accept their own failures as parents. But the evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss. Sarah's financial investigation had revealed the scope of Derek's network, and federal investigators were now involved, looking into potential RICO violations and organized corruption in the family court system. Lisa had become an unexpected ally. In the healing process, her horror at learning the truth about Derek's manipulation had motivated her to actively support the girl's relationship with me. She'd moved out of Derek's house and filed for divorce, cutting all ties with the man who'd systematically destroyed multiple families while claiming to protect them. I was so focused on giving the girls a better life that I didn't see what he was taking away from them, Lisa had told Dr. Walsh during a joint session. He convinced me that Michael's love wasn't enough, that they needed more than he could provide. I didn't realize he was teaching them that love was conditional, that they had to choose sides. The girls' progress in therapy was remarkable but fragile. They were learning to trust their own feelings again, to believe that loving their father didn't make them disloyal to their mother, but the damage would take time to fully heal. During one particularly emotional session, Sophie had asked the question that revealed how deeply Derek's manipulation had affected her. "Daddy, if you really love us, why didn't you stop Derek from making us sad?" The question broke my heart because it showed how Derek had twisted even my legal battles into evidence of inadequate love. The girls had internalized the belief that a father who truly cared would have prevented their confusion and pain, not understanding that I'd been fighting desperately to do exactly that. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt children, even when other adults are trying to protect them, Dr. Walsh had explained. Your daddy was fighting very hard to help you, but it took time for other grown-ups to understand what was really happening. Emma's breakthrough came when she remembered her 7th birthday party, the last celebration before Derek's influence had fully taken hold. She'd insisted on having the party at my apartment, despite Lisa's objections about the modest venue and simple decorations. I was so happy that day, Emma told Dr. Walsh. Daddy made a cake that looked like a rainbow, and we played games that made me laugh until my stomach hurt. But Derek said later that the party was inappropriate because it was too chaotic, and the cake was too messy. How did that make you feel when Derek said that? Confused? Because I loved that party. But Derek said if I really understood what was good for me, I wouldn't want parties like that anymore. Dr. Walsh's notes documented how Derek had reframed the girls' positive memories with me, teaching them to question their own happiness and natural preferences. He'd convinced them that their spontaneous joy during our time together was somehow wrong or unhealthy. The community's support was overwhelming. Parents from Emma and Sophie's school organized fundraisers to help with legal expenses. Other fathers shared their own stories of alienation and manipulation. Local therapists offered pro bono services to families affected by Derek's network. Mrs. Rodriguez, their teacher, had become a crucial witness in documenting the girls' behavioral changes and recovery. Her classroom observations showed the direct correlation between Derek's influence and the children's anxiety, as well as their gradual return to normal childhood behavior as his manipulation ended. Emma and Sophie are becoming themselves again, Mrs. Rodriguez reported to Dr. Walsh. They're laughing freely, taking creative risks in their artwork, and most importantly, they're not afraid to express affection for their father in front of their classmates. The state bar investigation was nearing completion, with Derek facing potential disbarment and criminal charges. The evidence of systematic manipulation, financial fraud, and professional misconduct was overwhelming. Several judges who'd consistently ruled in Derek's favor were also under investigation for potential corruption, but the most significant victory was in Dr. Walsh's final evaluation. Emma and Sophie Thompson have made remarkable progress in recovering from systematic parental alienation. With continued therapy and consistent support from both parents, they should be able to develop healthy relationships with all family members and overcome the psychological damage inflicted by deliberate manipulation. The road ahead would be long rebuilding trust, healing emotional wounds, and helping my daughters understand that love doesn't require choosing sides. But for the first time in months, Emma and Sophie were beginning to remember what it felt like to love their father without guilt or confusion. Derek's network was crumbling, his reputation destroyed, his career likely over. The families he'd torn apart were beginning to heal, and the corrupt system he'd exploited was finally being held accountable. The tide had turned, but the most important battle, winning back my daughters' hearts, was just beginning to show signs of victory. The recording device sat on my kitchen table like evidence from a crime scene, which in many ways it was. Derek's voice, captured during what he thought was a private intimidation session, had just provided the final piece of evidence needed to destroy him completely. It had been Patricia's idea to wear the wire during Derek's last desperate attempt to regain control. As his legal troubles mounted and his network collapsed, he'd become increasingly reckless, reaching out to former associates and victims in increasingly threatening ways. He contacted me last week, Patricia had told Sarah during our emergency meeting. He wants to meet, probably to threaten me into recanting my testimony or changing my story. It's the perfect opportunity to get him on record admitting what he's been doing. The meeting had taken place in Derek's office after hours, when his staff had gone home and he felt secure in his domain. Patricia had worn a wire provided by federal investigators, who were now treating Derek's activities as an organized criminal conspiracy. Derek's recorded voice filled my kitchen with the smooth, calculated tone I'd come to know and hate. Patricia, you're making a serious mistake by cooperating with this investigation. Michael Thompson is a nobody, a mechanic who can't even afford decent representation. Why would you destroy your own future to help him? Patricia's response had been perfect, designed to draw Derek into revealing more. I'm just telling the truth about what happened during our marriage. The truth. Derek's laugh was cold, arrogant. The truth is that you were an inadequate mother who couldn't provide Marcus with the stability he needed. The truth is that I saved your son from a lifetime of mediocrity and gave him opportunities you never could have provided, by turning him against me, by helping him understand reality. Children need to learn that blood relationships don't guarantee competence. Marcus is better off thinking of me as his real father because I actually am. in every way that matters. The admission was devastating. Derek had just confessed to deliberately alienating Patricia's son and rewriting the boy's emotional understanding of his own family. But there was more. Just like Emma and Sophie are better off thinking of me as their real father, Derek continued. Michael Thompson is a genetic accident in their libs of sperm. Donor who happened to be married to their mother before she found someone who could actually provide for them. Patricia had pushed further, but the girls love Michael. Doesn't that matter? Love. Derek's voice was filled with contempt. Children love what they're taught to love. Emma and Sophie loved Michael because they didn't know any better. Now they're learning to prefer quality over sentiment, success over failure, stability over chaos. The recording captured Derek admitting to systematic psychological manipulation spanning multiple families and years. But the most damning revelation was yet to come. The beauty of my system, Derek had continued, his arrogance overriding any caution, is that it's completely legal. I've never violated any custody orders or broken any laws. I simply help children understand what's really in their best interest, and I document their natural progression toward preferring competent parenting. Natural progression, coached progression, obviously. Children are remarkably malleable if you know the right techniques. A few months of consistent messaging, some strategic psychological evaluations, and even the most devoted father becomes irrelevant in his children's minds. Derek had laid out his entire methodology on tape: the coaching, the manipulation, the systematic erosion of father-child bonds disguised as child advocacy. He described his network of corrupt professionals and explained how they coordinated to ensure favorable outcomes in custody cases. But the most shocking revelation had come at the end of their conversation. When Patricia had asked about his future plans, "I've already secured a position with a firm in Los Angeles," Derek had said. "Once this investigation blows over, and it will, because I've covered my tracks to well, Lisa, and the girls will relocate with me. Michael Thompson will become a distant memory, maybe a Christmas card once a year if he's lucky. What if the investigation doesn't blow over?" Derek's response had been chilling in its casual cruelty. "Then I'll disappear with the girls anyway. Lisa's completely dependent on me financially now, and the children prefer me to their biological father. Even if the courts ruled against me, who's going to stop a family from taking a vacation that happens to become permanent?" The recording revealed Derek's complete contempt for the legal system he'd manipulated for years. He saw laws and court orders as obstacles to be circumvented rather than boundaries to be respected. His plan to kidnap my daughters had been laid out with the same cold calculation he'd used to destroy other families. Sarah had immediately turned the recording over to federal investigators and family court officials. Derek's admission of planned kidnapping elevated the case from professional misconduct to federal crimes. Involving interstate child abduction, the response was swift and decisive. Within hours of the recording being authenticated, Derek was arrested at his office on charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and planned kidnapping. His passport was confiscated, his assets frozen, and his law license immediately suspended pending criminal proceedings. But Derek's arrest was just the beginning. The recording had exposed the full scope of his network, leading to investigations of Dr. Amanda Foster, several family court judges, and other attorneys who'd participated in his conspiracy. What had started as a custody battle had uncovered systematic corruption throughout the family court system. Lisa's reaction to hearing the recording was devastating. She'd finally understood that Derek had never loved her or the girls they'd been targets in an elaborate con game designed to provide him with a ready-made family while eliminating any competition from inconvenient biological fathers. He told me you were unstable, that you couldn't provide what the girls needed, Lisa had said through tears during our first honest conversation in months. He made me believe that protecting them from you was the right thing to do. I was so focused on their financial security that I didn't see what he was stealing from them emotionally. The girls' reaction to Derek's arrest was complex and heartbreaking. They'd been systematically taught to see him as their protector and provider, and his sudden disappearance from their lives created new confusion and trauma. Dr. Walsh worked carefully to help them understand that Derek's removal was necessary for their emotional health, not another adult abandoning them. Derek wasn't protecting you, Dr. Walsh had explained gently. He was trying to keep you from loving your daddy. Adults who really care about children want them to love all the people in their family, not choose sides. Emma's question revealed how deeply Derek's manipulation had affected her understanding of adult relationships. If Derek was lying about daddy, was he lying about other things too? The answer was yes. Derek had lied about everything: his love for Lisa, his care for the children, his professional ethics, his basic humanity. He'd built his entire life on a foundation of manipulation and fraud, using his legal expertise to steal families and destroy father-child relationships for his own psychological gratification. But as devastating as Derek's betrayal was, the recording had also provided something precious: absolute proof that my daughter's rejection of me had been manufactured, not natural. Their confusion and divided loyalties weren't evidence of my inadequacy as a father, but proof of Derek's skill as a manipulator. The truth was finally emerging from months of lies and manipulation. Derek Martinez wasn't a successful attorney who'd fallen in love with a divorced mother. He was a predator who'd systematically targeted our family for destruction while maintaining the perfect facade of respectability. The recording device on my kitchen table contained more than evidence of Derek's crimes. It held validation of everything I'd fought for, proof that my daughter's love for me had been real before it was poisoned, and hope that it could be real again. Derek's voice on that tape had revealed his true nature, not a concerned stepfather, but a calculating criminal who saw children as possessions to be collected and fathers as obstacles to be eliminated. The truth had finally emerged, and it was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. The new custody order felt like a sacred document as Judge Harrison signed it in open court, surrounded by reporters, legal observers, and families who'd been affected by Derek's systematic destruction. The case had become a landmark in family law, establishing precedents for recognizing and combating parental alienation. Based on the overwhelming evidence of systematic psychological manipulation and parental alienation, Judge Harrison announced, "This court hereby grants primary custody to Michael Thompson, with Lisa Thompson receiving standard visitation rights. Derek Martinez is permanently prohibited from any unsupervised contact with the minor children and is banned from the premises of their school and extracurricular activities." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration from families who'd suffered similar manipulation. Tom Bradley squeezed my shoulder. His own custody rights had been restored the previous week based on evidence that Derek had used identical tactics. In his case, Patricia Martinez sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched the justice that had been denied to her own family finally being served. But Derek's legal troubles were just beginning. The federal charges had expanded as investigators uncovered the full scope of his criminal enterprise. Wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, attempted kidnapping, professional misconduct spanning multiple states. The indictments painted a picture of organized corruption that had affected dozens of families over nearly a decade. The state bar's disciplinary hearing had been swift and decisive. Derek's law license was permanently revoked, with a finding that his conduct violated every principle of legal ethics and constituted a systematic abuse of the judicial process for personal gain. Dr. Amanda Foster faced similar sanctions from the state psychology board, her license suspended pending criminal investigations. 3 family court judges were under federal investigation for their role in Derek's network. The evidence showed a pattern of rulings that consistently favored Derek's clients regardless of the facts presented, suggesting coordination and possible bribery. The entire family court system in our county was being reorganized to prevent similar corruption. Derek himself sat in federal detention, denied bail due to flight risk, and the severity of charges against him. His expensive lifestyle had crumbled. As assets were seized and his sources of illegal income were cut off, the man who'd once commanded respect and fear in legal circles was now facing decades in federal prison. But the most satisfying consequence was watching Derek's network of enablers face their own reckonings. Richard Morse, Derek's longtime partner, was facing disbarment for his role in covering up Derek's activities. Several court-appointed mediators and child advocates were under investigation for accepting bribes and providing false testimony. The civil lawsuits were equally devastating. Patricia had filed a massive suit against Derek for the alienation of her son and the destruction of her parental rights. Other families were following suit, with damages potentially reaching millions of dollars. Derek's malpractice insurance wouldn't cover criminal activities, leaving him personally liable for the destruction he'd caused. Lisa had become a powerful advocate for other mothers who'd been manipulated by Derek's network. Her testimony about how Derek had systematically turned her against me while positioning himself as the children's savior was crucial in helping other families understand how the manipulation had worked. "I thought I was protecting my daughters," Lisa had told a support group of affected families. "Derek convinced me that their father wasn't good enough, that they deserved better than what he could provide. I didn't realize he was teaching them that love was conditional, that they had to choose between their parents based on who could buy them more things." The impact on Emma and Sophie was gradual but profound. With Derek's influence completely removed and Dr. Walsh's continued therapy, they were slowly rediscovering their natural relationship with me. The anxiety and confusion that had marked their behavior for months was giving way to the spontaneous affection and joy I remembered from before Derek's manipulation. "Daddy, can we build a blanket fort today?" Emma had asked during our first weekend after the custody order was finalized. Derek said they were messy and inappropriate, but I loved building them with you. "We can build the biggest, messiest fort you want," I'd replied, watching her face light up with the pure joy that Derek had systematically suppressed. Sophie's recovery was equally heartening. She'd started laughing freely again, expressing opinions without checking for approval, and most importantly, showing affection without the guilt and confusion that had marked her behavior during Derek's influence. But perhaps the most significant victory was philosophical rather than legal. The case had exposed how the family court system could be corrupted by individuals who understood how to exploit its biases and procedures. New protocols were being implemented to detect and prevent parental alienation, and training programs were being developed to help court personnel recognize manipulation tactics. The ripple effects extended far beyond our family. Fathers' rights organizations were using our case as evidence that systematic parental alienation was a real and devastating problem that required legal recognition and remedies. Family law practices were being scrutinized for similar patterns of corruption and manipulation. Most importantly, other children were being saved from Derek's influence. Marcus Martinez, Patricia's son, had begun therapy to help him understand how his feelings toward his mother had been manipulated. At 15, the damage was more extensive, but Patricia remained hopeful that their relationship could eventually be repaired. "It's going to take years," Patricia had told me during one of our regular check-ins. "Marcus has been living Derek's lies for so long that undoing them feels impossible some days. But seeing Emma and Sophie recover gives me hope that my son can find his way back to the truth too." The financial consequences for Derek were as devastating as the legal ones. His expensive lifestyle had been built on a foundation of fraud and corruption that collapsed completely once exposed. The Willowbrook house was in foreclosure, the luxury cars repossessed, the private school tuition unpaid. But the most profound consequence was Derek's complete social isolation. The legal community, that had once respected and feared him, now viewed him as a pariah who'd corrupted everything he touched. Former colleagues distanced themselves, judges refused to hear his appeals, and even his criminal defense attorney had withdrawn from the case due to Derek's inability to pay legal fees. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, but federal prosecutors had indicated they would seek the maximum penalty, 25 years in federal prison for the full range of charges. At 52 years old, Derek was facing the possibility of spending the rest of his productive life behind bars. During one of our therapy sessions, Dr. Walsh had asked Emma and Sophie how they felt about Derek's arrest and the changes in their family. "I'm sad that Derek was lying to us," Emma had said thoughtfully, "but I'm happy that we don't have to choose between loving mommy and loving daddy anymore. Derek made it feel like we could only love one of them, but that doesn't make sense." Sophie's response was equally insightful. "I think Derek forgot that families are supposed to love each other, not compete with each other. Daddy and mommy both love us, just in different ways." The wisdom of children who'd survived psychological manipulation was heartbreaking and inspiring. Despite months of systematic alienation, Emma and Sophie had retained their fundamental understanding that love shouldn't require choosing sides. Judge Harrison's final words during the custody hearing had captured the broader significance of our case. This court hopes that the exposure of this systematic manipulation will serve as a warning to other professionals who might consider exploiting the family court system for personal gain. Children are not possessions to be collected or weapons to be used in adult conflicts. They are human beings who deserve the love and protection of all the adults in their lives. Justice had been served, consequences had been imposed, and my family was beginning to heal. Derek Martinez's reign of terror over vulnerable families was finally over. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in Emma's laughter as we built blanket forts, in Sophie's spontaneous hugs, and in the gradual restoration of the father-daughter relationships Derek had tried so hard to destroy. The new custody order hanging on my wall was more than a legal document. It was a declaration that love could triumph over manipulation, that truth could survive systematic lies, and that some bonds are too strong to be broken by even the most sophisticated psychological warfare. Derek Martinez had underestimated the power of a father's love and the resilience of children's hearts. In the end, that miscalculation had cost him everything. The family photo on my mantle tells the real story of victory, not the legal documents or newspaper headlines, but Emma and Sophie's genuine smiles as they posed with both their parents in Dr. Walsh's office after our final therapy session. Months after Derek's sentencing, my daughters were finally free to love without guilt, confusion, or manufactured loyalty conflicts. "Look, Daddy," Emma had said, pointing to her artwork displayed on Dr. Walsh's wall. "Remember when I could only draw sad pictures? Now I can draw happy ones again." The drawing showed our family, all of us, including Lisa, standing together under a rainbow. No tiny figures hidden in corners, no careful omissions of inconvenient family members. Just a 7-year-old's vision of love that includes everyone, important to her, exactly as it should be. Sophie's recovery had been equally remarkable. The anxious, over-apologetic child who'd asked permission before laughing had transformed back into the spontaneous, creative girl I remembered from before Derek's influence. Her recent parent-teacher conference had been a celebration of academic improvement and emotional growth. "Sophie is thriving," Mrs. Rodriguez had reported. "She's confident, creative, and most importantly, she's not afraid to make mistakes anymore." Children learn through trial and error, and Derek's perfectionism had robbed her of that natural process. The broader healing extended far beyond our immediate family. Lisa had become a powerful advocate for other mothers who'd been manipulated by unethical professionals, speaking at legal conferences and support groups about the subtle ways that concern for children's welfare could be weaponized against loving parents. I thought I was making smart choices for my daughters, Lisa had told a gathering of families affected by parental alienation. Derek convinced me that their emotional attachment to their father was somehow unhealthy, that true love meant helping them prefer stability over sentiment. I didn't realize he was teaching them that love was conditional and loyalty was exclusive. Lisa's own recovery from Derek's manipulation had been a crucial part of our family's healing. She'd needed therapy to understand how her legitimate concerns about financial security had been exploited to turn her against me. Dr. Walsh had helped her recognize that Derek's systematic manipulation had made her complicit in emotional abuse. She never would have consciously supported the co-parenting relationship that emerged from this understanding was stronger than what we'd had during our marriage. Both of us had learned hard lessons about communication, respect, and putting our daughter's emotional needs above our adult conflicts. I'm proud of us, Lisa had said during our last mediation session with Dr. Walsh. We've learned to disagree about practical things without making the girls feel like they have to choose sides. That's what healthy divorce looks like. Patricia Martinez had become like family to us, bonding with Lisa over their shared experience of Derek's manipulation, and working together to support their children's recovery. Her own relationship with Marcus remained complicated. 15 years old, and thoroughly indoctrinated in Derek's narratives. He was resistant to therapy and suspicious of his mother's attempts to rebuild their relationship. Some damage takes longer to heal, Patricia had admitted during one of our regular coffee meetings. But seeing Emma and Sophie recover gives me hope that Marcus will eventually find his way back to the truth. Children are remarkably resilient when given the chance. The legal aftermath had created lasting changes in our family court system. New protocols required psychological evaluations for any case involving alienation allegations, mandatory training for court personnel on recognizing manipulation tactics, and stricter oversight of expert witnesses like Dr. Foster. Derek's sentencing had been the final chapter in a saga that had destroyed countless families. 23 years in federal prison for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy charges. At 52, he would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars, finally facing consequences for a career built on exploiting vulnerable families. But the most satisfying consequence was Derek's complete irrelevance in our lives. The man who'd once dominated every aspect of our family dynamics was now just a cautionary tale we occasionally referenced in therapy sessions. Emma and Sophie rarely mentioned him, and when they did, it was with the matter-of-fact tone children use when discussing any unpleasant experience that's firmly in the past. Remember when Derek told us we couldn't build blanket forts? Sophie had said during one of our weekend adventures. That was silly. Fort building is the best kind of mess. The financial recovery had taken longer, but we'd rebuilt our stability through community support and our own hard work. The legal expenses had been largely covered by victim restitution funds and civil lawsuit settlements. More importantly, I'd learned that my daughter's love wasn't contingent on my ability to compete financially with wealthy stepfathers. Daddy, are we rich now? Emma had asked after learning about the settlement money. We're rich in the ways that matter most, I'd replied. We have each other, we have love, and we have time to enjoy being a family. The ripple effects of our case continued to spread throughout the legal community. Other corrupt networks had been exposed. Additional victims had come forward, and reforms were being implemented to prevent similar manipulation in the future. Our family's pain had contributed to systematic changes that would protect other children from Derek's brand of psychological warfare. Dr. Walsh's final evaluation had been everything I'd hoped for. Emma and Sophie Thompson have made complete recoveries from parental alienation syndrome. They demonstrate healthy attachments to both parents, age-appropriate emotional regulation, and no residual effects from the manipulation they experienced. Continued family therapy is no longer necessary, though periodic check-ins are recommended. The support group Lisa and I had started for families affected by parental alienation had grown to include dozens of parents and children working to rebuild relationships damaged by systematic manipulation. Sharing our story had helped others recognize similar patterns in their own lives and fight back against professionals who exploited the family court system. Your courage to expose Derek saved my family, one father had told me during a recent meeting. My ex-wife's attorney was using identical tactics, but because your case had established legal precedents, we were able to stop the alienation before it was too late. Emma and Sophie's 8-year-old birthday party celebrated together at my apartment with both Lisa and me present represented everything we'd fought to preserve. Homemade decorations, grocery store cake, discount party games, and the sounds of children laughing without worrying about whether their joy was appropriate or structured enough. This is the best birthday ever, Emma had declared, frosting smeared across her face from the slightly lopsided cake we'd decorated together. Even better than the fancy parties Derek used to plan, I'd asked gently, still checking to ensure his influence hadn't left hidden psychological landmines. Those parties were pretty, but they weren't fun, Sophie had replied with the devastating honesty children possess. Derek forgot that birthdays are supposed to be about being happy, not showing off. The wisdom of children who'd survived psychological manipulation continued to astound me. Despite months of systematic attempts to rewrite their understanding of love and loyalty, Emma and Sophie had retained their fundamental knowledge that relationships should be based on affection and joy, not competition and control. Looking at that family photo now, I see more than just four people smiling for the camera. I see the triumph of authentic love over manufactured affection, of truth over systematic lies, of resilience over manipulation. Emma and Sophie had been targets in Derek's psychological warfare, but they'd emerged stronger, wiser, and more secure in their understanding of what family really means. The battle for my daughters' hearts had been won not through superior resources or legal maneuvering, but through the simple persistence of genuine love. Derek had underestimated the power of authentic relationships and the resilience of children's natural affections. As I watch Emma and Sophie play in our small backyard building forts, getting messy, laughing without restraint, time reminded that the most important victories aren't measured in court orders or settlement amounts. They're measured in spontaneous hugs, bedtime stories without anxiety, and children who know they're loved unconditionally by both their parents. The nightmare Derek Martinez brought into our lives had finally ended. In its place was something. Derek's manipulation could never create a family built on truth, healed through adversity, and strengthened by the understanding that love multiplies when shared rather than diminishing when divided. Our new beginning wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for children who'd been forced to live in Derek's manufactured reality for too long, authenticity was the greatest gift we could offer. The family photo on my mantle would fade with time, but the relationships it captured would only grow stronger. Emma and Sophie were home not in any building or custody arrangement, but in the secure knowledge that their father's love had never wavered, even when they'd been taught to doubt it. Some stories end with victory, others end with justice. The best ones end with love reclaimed and families restored. This story ends with all three.